What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 126 on this Thursday, November 7th, 2024. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy, with you on a Thursday. CK's here. Our recruiting expert means we have some recruiting things we want to hit. Of course, we will talk about Michael Fasusi. What's the latest there? Should OU fans be worried? We got the right guy here to ask in Collin Kennedy. Some other updates on some 2026 prospects following the Maine visit weekend. And then we'll dive into this Missouri game a little bit. I'll also get Collin's thoughts on the game itself on the field, but the overall context of this thing, all the history of the last couple of years, what it would mean for Oklahoma to win this game beyond just the literal they get to 6-4. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. And James E. Jackson will be along at the back end for some in-state recruiting talk as well on the back end. So a good Thursday show for you. Send you on your way. The game preview tomorrow. Busy times right now. Lots of sports, football winding down. We got a good Thursday program for you. So, CK, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into what is the thing that most fans are most interested in right now from a recruiting standpoint. Michael Fasusi, 2025 offensive line commit, 5-star, a guy we've talked about a lot on this show, both over the terms of his recruitment and then since then, because he's kind of in a lot of ways the crown jewel of Oklahoma's 2025 class. You were there on Friday, as was Brent Venables and Bill Bedenbaugh, but as were some other people that are still pursuing Michael Fasusi. I've gotten DMs myself, and I don't even really cover recruiting even 1% the level that you do, so I know you're getting asked a lot. What's the latest here on Michael Fasusi? Obviously an OU commit, but there's still, as we talk about all the time, until they sign, you have to kind of still, keep your antennas up. What are things kind of at right now with what's obviously a massive, massive part and piece of Oklahoma's 2025 class?
Yeah, man, I don't even know really where to start, right? I mean, there's so many different directions you could take this, but as the early signing period gets closer, and I do think that it's relatively noteworthy, they moved the early signing period up to about December the 4th. And so could actually help Oklahoma in this situation with both Texas and Texas A&M definitely hovering. First, I want to mention that Michael and I, we go back a ways after everything kind of settled down. He and I sat down and talked one-on-one for about a half hour on and off the record. And that interview was up at SoonersIllustrated.com. Gotten a lot of good feedback on that piece. So I would encourage folks to go check it out. Michael really kind of went in depth on his perception of the way things stand and some things that are going through his head. And look, man, it's not easy. Like you mentioned, Brent Venables, Bill Bedenbaugh, I believe that was the first time they went to go see him play a game in person. He got his Under Armour All-American jersey presented to him during the game. Steve Sarkisian, the head coach of Texas, flew in on a helicopter, which I was laughing because I was talking with one of the Louisville coaches pregame. He's like, yeah, we've had to try and figure out a way for Sark to land the chopper on our baseball field.
Yeah, where are you going to land that thing?
Yeah, and I'm like, man, it's kind of crazy, too, because I know good and well Sark's been driving around Dallas all day today, so randomly pulling out the chopper for a 5-star kind of tells you where things stand.
Sure.
Sark was there with Chris Gilbert, who is the assistant to the head coach at Texas. He's a legend here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a high school coach for a very long time, now in the college game. He's one of the best builder of relationships. And then I also want to mention really quick, I'm told that Texas A&M is going to go see Michael play this Friday in the final regular season game. So
yeah,
that's where we are. What's going on behind the scenes right now? I think that the part of this that's not getting talked about a lot that I can see anywhere, but that it really stands out to me. Michael made the decision to go to Oklahoma because of two very important things, among several other reasons, right? But in my opinion, it's two big things. Number one, his relationship with Bill Bedenbaugh.
Mm-hmm.
And I know many wonder what's going to happen with Bill, given the fact that the offensive coordinator search is going on right now. I think In large part, though, a lot of us do believe that Bill will be in Norman unless something drastic changes. And with that in mind, that's the coach that Michael wants to play for. But the very significant aspect of this that, again, I don't think is being discussed nearly as much as it needs to, and I'm going to, on top of the Fasusi interview that I wrote, I'm going to probably drop a in-depth notebook sometime tonight as far as what I'm hearing and some thoughts on this. But one big point in there tonight, Josh, is going to be the fact that Michael isn't the only one that chose Oklahoma. People forget that he moved to America from Africa with his family. And when they arrived in the States, they had no idea what the sport even was. And I remember a couple years ago coming back to Texas, one of the first prospects I went to go see was Michael Fasusi. And we talked about how his parents still had no idea what any of this stuff was. They had no clue what college football recruiting meant, what it was like to play that sport at that level. They were more so worried about him doing what normal young men do, which is going on and getting a quality education. And so the Fasusi family, why I bring that up, approached this process with a very fresh perspective, right? No built-in biases that you typically have out there. No foregone conclusions or presumptions about different programs, whatever else. And so recruiting Fasusi's family was very much atop the priority list for all these programs, as much as it was recruiting Mike himself. And the Fasusi family chose Oklahoma, as did Mike. In the interview that I wrote up, one thing that I thought was pretty profound was Mike said, "We'll see what happens, but if these other programs can find a way to change my heart and my family's heart, then we'll have to come to a decision." And I think Oklahoma should at least have a little bit of confidence right now in that the family vote, in my opinion, still resides with OU. We'll see how this goes. Mike, as of right now, isn't necessarily planning on taking other visits. I know he's wanting to get back to Norman for the Alabama game. If these other programs that are hovering are going to pull Michael Fasusi away, Bill Beanbo is definitely one layer to this, but they would definitely, in my opinion, have to also try and sway Fasusi's family in their direction too. I don't really see that happening unless a visit is taken on campus somewhere. And I was talking about this with someone the other day. The way that the schedule plays out, if Fasusi goes to the Alabama game in Norman, that puts Texas on kind of a time crunch because outside of the Florida game this weekend at home, there's not really an opportunity there for the Longhorns to get him on campus, given, again, if Fasusi goes to Norman for that Bama weekend. And then A&M. I think there's two things. Not only does A&M have to figure out a way to pursue Mike, to pursue his family, to potentially get them on campus. You know, A&M is very much in the thick of it down the stretch for another familiar face in Lamont Rogers. Lamont Rogers committed to Missouri, which I think we'll get to talk about that here in a second, right?
Yeah.
Lamont Rogers going down the stretch is another one who several programs are trying to flip. And it, in my opinion, that process kind of favors the Aggies as things stand today. Do you risk potentially messing something up with a prospect like Lamont Rogers in an attempt to go after Fasusi heavily? Or do you play it a little bit more carefully on the Fasusi front and try to potentially pull off what I think is a relatively feasible flip right now in Lamont Rogers if you're Texas A&M? So I could podcast about this situation for hours.
Yeah.
And hours. And we still have a month to go. So I the last thing I'll say, I was talking to Mike after the game. We were chopping it up. And he said that he had a conversation with Chris Gilbert, who visited him at Louisville High School before both he and Sark for Texas pulled up to the game. And Chris Gilbert basically told Mike, I'm going to have someone FaceTime me and point the camera at your table on signing day just to see where you actually put the pen. And Mike said he started laughing, and I think it's a very fair way to sum up the way this thing is going. Oklahoma, I still think, is a very good chance to close it out with their kingpin of the 2025 class, but it really isn't going to be easy.
Hard not to be nervous if you're on the Oklahoma end of it, just because of what he means to the class. We've talked about it a bunch of times. This is the guy that is, like you said, he's the centerpiece of this thing. And when you look at, Bill Bedenbaugh, obviously it's been a rough year for that position. Nobody's hiding from that. We've talked about it all season long ad nauseum. But a lot of the light at the end of the tunnel has been, look at the class they have in 2025. Look at some of these young guys. And one guy's not going to completely undo all of that, but he's a huge part of it. And so we'll have to wait and see here. I would think that the family aspect that you talked about, you have to convince the whole family, that probably works in Oklahoma's favor. Not to say that Steve Sarkisian doesn't do this, but we've heard time and time again from these guys that Brent Venables winning over the parents, winning over the moms. Like, he's really good with families. So I would think that would help. I don't know, looking for positives if you're an Oklahoma fan, but you have to be nervous. You have to be, just because of what he means and how good of a prospect he is. So we'll see. Collin's all over. He's got a great relationship with Fasusi right down the road from you down there. So we'll keep an eye on it. Like you said, still got a ways to go. A little less than a month till signing day. It's going to be one of those sweaty ones until it's done. It's going to be a little sweaty. This is the way it is.
I was joking with Sean Hutton, the 2025 preferred walk-on commit for Oklahoma on the offensive line. Fasusi's teammate and close friend, who I wrote a story whenever Fasusi committed that Sean walked in to the commitment ceremony literally sweating and wiping his face with a towel. And I joked with Sean, like, man, you sweaty round 2 for you, just trying to get to the finish line with your future roommate potentially, which is another layer to this, right? I mean, sure. Oklahoma has a guy that Fasusi's very close with, also committed to Oklahoma as well. I know that the offensive line group for Oklahoma in 2025, they're all very close. Ryan Foje, congrats to him, by the way, last night getting his Navy All-American Bowl jersey. Yeah. Foje's kind of been a, for lack of a better term, primary recruiter of Fasusi. I think those two understand how important it is that they both get to campus. But yeah, in the end, man, this is going to be one, like you mentioned, you can talk about it all you want, but until we actually get to the day where the national letter of intent, or lack thereof, I guess, considering the new rules, when he actually has to come down to a decision, this all becomes a moot point. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to follow, and I think Oklahoma's feeling good, but man, every reason to be nervous about what's ahead.
For sure. Oklahoma.247sports.com, become a VIP member. Keep up with all this on a day-to-day, basically, as Collin Kendi all over it. As far as some other recruiting stuff, let's shift to 2026. You got a few prospects here, a few guys' names you wanted to get out there onto the podcast following the Maine game. And we talked about it going in. Wasn't a loaded visit list, but there was still some notable names that were going to be in town. Talk about a couple of the feedback that you've gotten and some 2026 guys that, Oklahoma, you maybe are making a little bit of headwind on.
Yeah, I thought that while it kind of went under the radar that OU had visitors in town for the Maine game, because not only was it not, like you mentioned, the most extensive or impressive list, it was a dreary day, lower opponent. Not a lot of people were all that interested in who was in the stadium because there probably weren't too many people in the stadium themselves, right? So I did find it significant, though, that these two specific names I'm getting ready to talk about were on campus, and the feedback that we got coming out of those trips was very positive. I wrote a story about this first guy, Talanoa Ely. He is a 2026 linebacker out in the state of California, specifically Orange, California. Number 46 overall player nationally in the composite. But Josh, we've got this kid in 5-star territory at 24/7 Sports. He's a number 28 overall recruit in 2026 for us at 24/7. Top 3 linebacker prospect as well, which Brent Venables, Zach Alley, the rest of that linebacker crew, all in the staff, had to be pretty excited about Ely getting to campus. I was curious how this was going to go because when we talk heavy hitters, they're all involved with Ely, right? Oregon has kind of been seen as the favorite. I know Ohio State's been involved. Texas has been involved. USC, a few others. But out of the visit for Ely and Norman, even with it being Maine weekend, I really think Oklahoma actually covered some ground here. Jolie Ale is outstanding at her job. She's the director of recruiting strategy, on campus recruiting. She does several different things for OU's program. She played a big role in hosting the Ely family. It sounds like that relationship that was built there really impressed the crew. Ely was looking forward to seeing that defense and Brent Venables, Zach Alley kind of coach up the backers. What role do they play in the system? I think that impressed. I think just the family feel in general in Norman impressed them. And coming out of it, man, Blair Angulo for us at 24/7 had an interview up with Ely afterwards. But a lot of positive feedback coming out of this one. And I'm not saying Oklahoma leads or anything. That'd be ridiculous, right? I think more than anything, I probably shared the same sentiment as a lot of Oklahoma fans in that, okay, well, what can actually be done here with one of the best recruits in the country who resides out on the West Coast? And it sounds like OU did a lot. So definitely a name to get more familiar with as 2026 enters the spotlight. And then, of course, speaking of 2026 in that spotlight, I've talked about this before, but every so often, man, you get like a East Coast, the DMV area recruit for OU that the Sooners kind of sink their teeth into and try to pursue. Seems like that guy in 2026 could be Carter Scruggs, 4-star offensive tackle, the number 128 overall recruit in the country for us at 24/7 Sports. We have him graded out as a top 6 interior offensive lineman. I know he plays offensive tackle at his high school in Leesburg, Virginia. 6'6", 290. If I haven't touched on the frame, big dude. Big dude.
Yeah.
And when I found out he was visiting, and then Carter and I swapped texts a little bit before, that was another one where I was like, what's going on here? Are they actually going to be able to make some waves with a guy out there on the East Coast, especially at a time right now where Big Ten presences are basically at an all-time high? Penn State, Michigan still recruiting at a very high level. Ohio State, so many. But in his interview with Brian Doan for us at 24/7 Sports, and then just talking to some folks on my end, Carter has family out in Oklahoma. He's very familiar with the OU program. He's very familiar with what Bill Beanbo does on the offensive line. And so from family connections to program familiarity, and then obviously holding OU in high regard from an offensive line standpoint.
Yeah.
Oklahoma's definitely in the mix here with Carter Scruggs. And man, I turned on the tape the other day. I like this guy. I can see why he's in the top 130, man. He's a Bill Beanbo dude. He plays nasty. I think he could play 4 different spots potentially on the offensive line with that 6'6", 290 frame. But in general, man, Ely is going to be obviously the headliner with him being as ranked as high as he is. But an offensive lineman comes into town and he's got folks in the state. He really likes Oklahoma for a few different reasons. I think Carter Scruggs is another one out of that Maine visit weekend who OU fans should be pretty excited about.
A couple of really interesting names there. And guys that are from well out of state that they got into town for that game. And even though it got moved up to 11 a.m. kick, impressive. It's not a weekend that we, really build as a major recruiting weekend going in, but those 2 names, those are 2 legit prospects. And so we'll see how things progress with them, and interesting names to kind of file away there from Collin. As far as this weekend, Oklahoma's going to Columbia, Missouri. Tom and I are going to be making the trip up there on Friday. Obviously, I want to get your thoughts on the game as always, on the field and get your pick as we always do on Thursdays. But before we do that, just kind of the overall context of this game. Brent Venables talked about it a little bit on his press conference on Tuesday. What a win would mean this weekend to get to bowl eligibility, extend that streak, give you some momentum late in the year, a big road win. But then you kind of factor in the toxicity that we've joked about a bunch of times between the fan bases, the recruiting battles, the transfers. They've got a couple of Oklahoma's players. Oklahoma's got one of theirs in J.J. Hester from a few years ago.
Yep.
There's a lot of, these two teams haven't played since 2011, but it feels like they've been intertwined the last couple of years in a lot of different ways. What's kind of your sense of the weight of this game, if that makes sense? Just because, again, people, fans like to do the whole, is it a rivalry thing? I don't know if I would go that far. Obviously,
yeah,
they were in the same conference for a long time. So from that standpoint, I mean, there's a long-standing series. They played a lot of times. Oklahoma obviously has the heavy advantage in the win column, but there seems to be a lot more to this game, certainly, than just the literal get to 6 win, try to get a big road win, all that. Like this is a huge game for like the program vibes, it feels like, this weekend. Is that fair?
100%. I think where I want to start with this is exactly like you mentioned. Is this a rivalry? I think your perception of that is based largely on what do you actually define as a rivalry in college athletics? Because if you look at it from like a historical perspective, a stakes perspective, how often were these two teams at their best when they were playing each other, geography, all that stuff. If it's more so about the on-field year-over-year tradition that does it for you on a rivalry side of things, like, yeah, I get why you would say no. That being said, I'm not overly dismissive of it because in the same sense that I see the Red River game or Bedlam being on that front, I also kind of see Nebraska over there, even though Oklahoma and Nebraska now, I mean, it did way different times than when it was one of the most renowned rivalries in college football specifically. Over here, if you define a rivalry as pure animosity and regional implications and some history involved, but more so about the weight that it carries away from the field, like I do think that people who say Oklahoma, Missouri is or could be a rivalry have a right to think that, because going into this weekend, I do think it kind of paints the picture of what this could become. Stakes are there. Oklahoma's got to reach 6 wins, get to a bowl eligibility with this outing. This is a must-win for OU against an opponent that will be very excited to welcome them in, given the stakes. But on top of that, OU and Missouri, this game, whether people want to admit it or not, will become a matchup that carries weight for years to come from a recruiting perspective. These two butt heads often. We've seen it in years past, and they're going to continue to do so in the years to come. People are going to use this game very specifically as an opportunity to host recruits and basically let them kind of evaluate things for themselves. But then on top of that, the transfer connections, things of that nature, momentum in general within the conference, you're always trying to separate from each other in whatever tier you perceive them to be in the SEC. I think that this game, it may not be a rivalry right now, and I don't think that it is, but I think it has the elements of something that could become, in the future, one of the more annually discussed, quote unquote, rivalry matchups, given where we're headed. Take it all aside, though, man. This is a huge game. I mean, you and I were talking about it on the phone the other day. This is the first time in a very long time that going into this, just as someone covering the game, I'm nervous about what's about to happen.
There's a lot of stakes. Yeah.
I think it says a lot about what this game is, but I also think it kind of reinforces what this game could become, because not only is there a lot that happens coming out of this game, there's even more that could take place given the nature of the subtle animosity between these two.
For sure. I think that the disdain is certainly there. And look, I mean, the obvious is that there's a void, right? When we lost Bedlam, we don't have Bedlam anymore.
Right.
So you have the Texas game, which is always going to be number one. But there's kind of that void of that late season game you look at the end of the year and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of disdain between Oklahoma and Texas too. But there's that certain, it's just a different level because there's that peer-to-peer sort of feel to it. Whereas Bedlam or this, Oklahoma looks at Missouri and Oklahoma State as beneath them. And the flip side of that is Oklahoma State and Missouri look at Oklahoma as they think they're better than us, kind of a thing. And that's what makes it great in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I'm with you too. Like, calling a rivalry is probably a bit strong. I never looked at it as a rivalry before when they were in the Big 12 the previous time around. I was stunned. I don't know if stunned's the right word, but going through the game notes this week, would you guess that Oklahoma's won 20 of the last 22 of this series? Like, obviously, and Brent Venables talked about this week, when Missouri left the Big 12, they were one of the better programs in the conference. I mean, they were in the Big 12 championship game pretty regularly. They were number one and in the pursuit of a national title in one season, which Oklahoma played spoiler, Big 12 championship game. But 20 of the last 22. I mean, Oklahoma has owned this series historically and in the more recent history as well. So it's going to be fun. I'm excited for this game. I would imagine that the crowd will be up for it, to say the least, and a lot to be excited about. I will get your thoughts on the actual game itself as far as how you think this thing could play out on the field. There's a lot of question marks in regards to who's actually going to be around for this game, which makes it hard to analyze and to pick. We have the first availability report on Wednesday night. Basically, Oklahoma, everyone that you would wonder about is questionable. Jay Taylor's out. Now, Michael Tarquin wasn't on it, which would suggest he's available. Oh, no, he was questionable. Excuse me.
He was questionable.
Questionable. Gavin Sawchuk, yes. But Javante Barnes was questionable. The two receivers, Alif Farouk and Deion Burks, were questionable. And then Missouri quarterback Brady Cook is questionable. So we didn't really get a whole lot of, lean one way or another. That's a bunch of 50-50s. But in your mind, where does things kind of stack up in this game on the field? What's going to maybe be the deciding factor in Oklahoma getting this thing done?
This game is questionable. I would basically sum it up as that.
The word of the week.
I think the word of the week is questionable. And as far as what the on-field result could be, more than questionable, to say the least. First and foremost, weather is still looking like it's going to be bad, correct? Quick check-in here.
It looks like, I think the hope right now is that it's going to rain a lot during the day, and then by night it'll just be wet and cold, but not actually raining. That's the hope. But there is a chance it could be raining,
I don't know who benefits or who is at further detriment because of weather in this game. I have no idea. I think my biggest fear about this matchup is that people are going to have this like preconceived notion that just because Brady Cook isn't playing, that Oklahoma gets a guaranteed win. You talked about a little bit. Who's blocking up front for Oklahoma? Because that's probably as good as playing your backup, right? On the road in the SEC against pretty good defensive line. Speaking of some of those recruiting battles, Chris McClellan, former Oklahoman, guy that OU went after a time or two.
Yeah.
He's having a really good season for the Tigers. There are a couple things here for me, and obviously the game preview podcast is going to drop with y'all tomorrow. First and foremost, in my opinion, it's about what happens with Missouri's run game. Obviously, Cody Schrader last year was electric. They were atop the entire NCAA in rushing. But with him gone, Nate Noel is a really talented running back for them. But he was listed as questionable as well, if I remember correctly. And if he's not in there, there's some layers to this. Missouri's run core concept is outside zone. Oklahoma has played a few teams that run the outside zone stuff, but not a team that necessarily has it as its core. The closest thing would maybe be like Oklahoma State in years past or things of that nature. Baylor when Jeff Grimes was there. And sometimes that kind of look does present challenges. So how OU handles the run game here, in my opinion, of Missouri is going to be huge. I think Oklahoma's defensive line has to be the reason that they win this game. That's the way I'm perceiving it going in, especially considering the fact that Caden Green, whoever's playing on the left side, we don't know what that status is going to be. I know Marcus Bryant, their left tackle, he transferred in from SMU. He was playing on the same offensive line at SMU with Branson Hickman. Both of those guys were seen as transfers who were going to make an immediate impact at whichever program. Both of those guys have kind of struggled now. Taking on Missouri's run game is going to be big. OU's offensive line in general, if Tarquin is not taken care of in pregame, let me put it that way. I don't know if they're still doing Tord all these days, but if Tarquin's not out there, man, this is still very much a losable game in my opinion, because if OU's offensive line is not ready to play on the road, it doesn't really matter in any facet. Javonte Barnes too, man. I mean, him being listed as questionable. Like I think I still expect him to play, but if something were to happen, even in pregame, which we've seen with guys like Gavin Sawchuk, OU is up a roaring creek with no paddle without Javonte Barnes in this matchup. It doesn't matter. I could be back there a quarterback for Missouri, and the Tigers would probably suddenly be the favorite again. So health, I think the line of scrimmage is ultimately going to decide this thing. And I know a lot of people will talk about the quarterback position, but honestly, that's kind of the spot that I'm least concerned about, because I think Missouri is built to work around it. We haven't even talked about Luther Burden, by the way. And so, I don't know, man, there's a lot of layers to this game that are questionable. And whoever has answers, I think ultimately finds a way to come out with the victory.
It's as hard as any to pick because of all the questions we just said. There's a lot of, we don't know who's going to be out there for either team right now. Both starting running backs, starting quarterback for Missouri, top two wideouts for OU. I mean, it's and the starting tackle. I mean, the list kind of goes on, but as best you can, take a shot. How does this thing go? Does Oklahoma get this thing done? Because again, we talked about it, all week. This is pretty clearly their best chance to get to that 6-win mark. Not that they, have no shot in the last two games, but obviously it's a step up in competition from this game. It's a huge game. Does Oklahoma get there in your mind? If you had to say one way or another today on Thursday, how does it go?
If I want to state for the record, if Javonte Barnes doesn't play, I don't think Oklahoma's winning. I am not near as committed to the concept that this is a easier win for OU than a lot of other people out there. Mm-hmm. I still think the Tigers very much have a chance. But if Barnes is out there, I know for me personally, I think that if Oklahoma can somehow get Michael Tarquin ready at 6:44 p.m., that would be huge. In the end, I'm going 13-10.
Yes.
Oklahoma reaches bowl eligibility in a yucky, gross, disgusting game where both teams are trying to find those answers, and inevitably OU comes out on top. It's not going to be easy. And again, I think that there are ways for this to go very much in the wrong direction for Oklahoma. But I think if they can even get a few bounces of the ball their direction, the Sooners find a way to reach 6 wins.
Just feels like one of those games that's going to be like one huge mistake by someone, low scoring, maybe bad weather. I'm with you. And we'll pick the game and dive into all the angles of it on the game preview on Friday. Myself, Tom Green, James E. Jackson. So look forward to that Friday morning. Oklahoma, Missouri will set the table for that one, which is going to be a very interesting game on Saturday night. CK, appreciate you as always. Safe travels around DFW and wherever else you're headed this weekend. Get into the nitty-gritty of the high school football season last weekend before playoffs and stuff like that. So we're getting to the meat and bones here. We're getting down to the end of the road.
We definitely are. Last thing I want to hit y'all with before I get out of here, CBS Sports Research sends over their documents every week, and I comb through it and put together a little story about it. The first bullet point, The winner of this game claims the Tiger Sooner peace pipe. Anyone ever heard that before?
Who knew that was a thing? Yeah. That's been chilling in Norman for 15 years, if it's a thing.
Is that a thing? I mean, I read that earlier this week, and I was like, I'm going to leave this up to the YouTube commenters because I have never heard of the Tiger Sooner peace pipe in my life. But if it is out there, Josh, please get a shot of it for me because I would love to see what it looks like. So
I will.
Y'all be safe if you're going to the game this weekend. Appreciate y'all watching. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel and all that, and we'll finish out the last few games of the season, man. We'll see how this goes.
Where does the season go? All right, that's it for this portion. We're going to get James in here on the back end. A little in-state recruiting talk. Notable name there we're going to get into coming up here in just a second right now here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast. All right, we now bring in James E. Jackson onto the program. Comes on a Thursday shows. Does some in-state recruiting talk as per usual. James, we talked going into last weekend about Cash Jacobson a little bit, both with Collin and with you. Jinx, defensive lineman, was in town. We knew going in, we didn't have that offer yet, but there was a guy that, could be a late ad for Oklahoma in 2025, maybe. Mm-hmm. He did get the offer. You talked to him about his visit. What are some feedback from you as far as, how it went for Cash, and could this maybe be a guy that Oklahoma could add here in 2025, a little less than a month from early signing day?
Yeah, and I'll say it right off the bat, Josh. OU is in a very, very good position with Cash right now.
Sure.
Like, that's really the gist that I got from talking with him, getting intel on him and things like that. OU's in a very good position. He talked to Todd Bates for over half an hour, which it seems like every time I talk to a recruit that's on the defensive front anywhere, they're like, I talked to Todd Bates for an hour and a half. It's like always like he's very good at what he does. Like, he always leaves a good impression, and you can see it again with Cash as well. Like, this is a guy that, I don't know you all touched on it, but he decommitted from the FCS national champion because he thought, you know what, I think I have a better chance of going a little bit higher. Now, when he committed to the FCS national champion, he was like 245 playing D tackle. He was very slim, undersized for that position. He put on 50 pounds, 40 to 50 pounds since like January, just like eating and, working out right. He talked about, it's in the article. It's all about how he did this and the nutritional value that he went through and things like that. He's put on so much weight. And he said at the same time, he hasn't slowed down at all on the field. Like, it was the perfect formula and a perfect scheme that he and the Jinx coaches put together that helped him get to 290 now, which is where he's at. And that's, you come into that coming almost 300 to a school that's in the SEC. That is something a lot of schools want. And you're seeing that with the explosion of offers that he's been getting as of late. But right now, I think OU is if not the front runner, they're really up there right now for him for the in-state talent.
No, I mean, I agree completely. He's a guy, sometimes guys are a little bit late bloomers. And, like you said, talk about with Collin a little bit last week, you throw in the tape, you kind of like what you see. And Oklahoma's done a good job, kind of finding those diamond in the rough in-state guys. And we'll see what they can do here. But, offer comes through. Feel like there's some momentum here. We'll see. Obviously, like we said, a month till early signing day. We'll see if he intends to enroll early or not. But Oklahoma making some waves. And so a name to keep in mind for a late ad in 2025 after they lost a couple defensive line guys earlier in the cycle, and Floyd Bucard and Kamori Moore. Flipping over to the hardwood with a little women's hoops. Obviously, we were at the season opener the other day. Great start for Jenny Baranchek's team. We talked about that going into the season opener, number 10 preseason poll. A lot of excitement on that program, but they're also building for the future. Jenny Baranchek, as you would expect, with all the momentum she's got on the floor, very personable, is doing a very nice job on the recruiting end of it as well. I know there's been a lot of good news here for women's hoops as of late. What are some kind of the updates there as that team and program continues to replenish, not just obviously for the near future, but down the road as well?
Yeah, we'll start off with the guard that is one of the most highly touted players in the country, and she's number one in the state of Oklahoma. She's actually number one in Norman. She's from Norman. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Keely Parks, who has been all over the country over the last couple of months, just taking as many visits as she can. She's finally navigated her list down to 3 now. So that includes Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Kansas. Now, from what I've been hearing from the coaching staff at OU, they always thought that she wasn't a player that wanted to go far away from home, so she wasn't going to go to like UCLA, LSU, those type of schools. Even though she took visits and had good times there, it always seemed like she wanted to play closer to home. And so you see that now with this list. She's done a really good job of putting that together. And I think OU is in a good position with her as well. I talked about Cash, but I think OU is really, really in a good situation. Now, her former, I guess, AAU coach, high school coach, alongside of her father, was Michael Neal, who is the women's assistant coach at OU. So, like, there's a tie there. And there's many, players from the state of Oklahoma that are on the team now. Zaya Van, Skylar Van, players like that. Keziah Lofton will be there after she graduates this year. So there's so much familiarity for Keely Parks that I think it's a good spot for OU to be in right now, because Keziah Lofton is a really good friend of hers. They've grown up playing together at AAU in the AAU circuits. And so they're both highly touted guards. So her already going there, being in her ear because she was with her on her visit to OU, it's a good situation for OU to be in right now. And we'll talk about the other with Maddie Vickery. She's further down the line. She's at 2027, but this is her second time in Norman. First time getting the visit, a game day visit, getting to see the team, getting to see them in action and things like that. And she said she just loved to see the way Coach Jenny Baranczyk, handle things in the locker room, how she gave her speeches, how she gave her halftime motivational things. She got to see all of that. She got to meet all of the players, and just being a part of this, getting to meet the coaching staff once again, it was really good experience for her. I mean, that's pretty much the gist of what she said, because she's also one of those highly touted guards. She's over, she's 6 feet tall. She's a player that can do a lot of different things. There are a lot of people that want her. I mean, obviously,
sure.
She's from the state of Kansas. She won the state championship in her freshman year. She was a starter on that team and played a lot of minutes for them, averaging up 15 points a game. So she's a player like that that's going to be really, really good. I mean, by the end of her career, Josh, she's got to be up there. Like, she's going to be like a top 5 player, I think, because of the way the numbers she's already putting up now on the team that she's on, which is a very talented team. It's incredible. So she had a really good visit with OU. So I think as OU is doing really well on the basketball court, things are going really well in the recruiting circuit as of right now, the way things look.
Just a program with a ton of momentum in a lot of ways. Obviously putting players to the next level, playing really well right now. Certainly think that this year's team could be a team that makes a deep run. And now you have all the recruiting success that comes with that. It's a lot to be excited about if you're a fan of OU women's hoops. And it's funny too with Keely Parks. I'm kind of thinking like number 1 player in Oklahoma, Kansas, Oklahoma State, from Norman. Have we done this before? Trae Young. This is Trae Young on the women's side, basically, kind of all over again, because that's everything I just said. Norman, number 1 player in Oklahoma, 5-star prospect, which Keely Parks is in the composite.
Yep.
Oklahoma, Kansas, OSU. It's like we did this already, and it worked out pretty well once. So we'll see if Jenny Baranczyk can.
And hey, I know for a fact Ray Young, Trae Young's father, is involved in this as well. He's posted a couple of pictures with her, on the game day visit, things like that. So they're all involved. So that's pretty funny. Yeah.
There you go. You ties all together. I think that's it for now. Again, we'll be back tomorrow, James, myself, and Tom, for the game preview, Oklahoma and Missouri. We'll obviously set the stage for that one, keys to the game, players to watch, and we're going to make our final score predictions. And then we'll be back next Monday, as soon as Illustrated Podcast, to wrap up the Missouri game, get y'all ready for the next week, the bye week next week. We'll enjoy that for a little bit as well. So we'll catch you guys then. For Collin Kennedy earlier, James D. Jackson, I'm Josh Callaway. Signing off for now. We'll see you tomorrow for the game preview. But until then, next time, right back here on the Sooners Illustrated Podcast.